2. Welcome to the Authenticity Lab, a podcast where we celebrate the journey of reconnecting with our authentic selves. I'm Dr. Kelsey Miles, a musician, a songwriter, and also a chemistry professor. Each week, I'll share a new story and I'll break it down with none other than the scientific method. I find that this helps me separate myself from the muck and dirt and grit of life so that way I can learn as much as possible. And it helps me live more boldly and lead with curiosity and connect me to what really makes me who I am. And my hope is that by sharing life experiments that you too can run, this will help you as well. So this week's episode, I think you are going to love. It's a very deeply personal story. So let's dive right in. We are going to break the cycle. We're going to break the cycle of repeating patterns in our relationships. Have you ever had a relationship that keeps showing up in your life? It could be the same one or it could be different people, but it still feels like the same type of relationship. And no matter what you do, it keeps showing up. The same pattern, the same types of things that you thought you already healed from, the things you thought you already learned, and all of a sudden it's there again. Well, me too. I have had people in my life that have shown up again and again, and I kept thinking it was bad luck or just the luck of the draw. And then I also thought maybe it was just them, and I sometimes attracted people like that. That's not what happened at all. In fact, it was me. I was the one that was constant throughout each one of those stories, and I learned how to break the cycle. So let me share this story with you. Again, it's deeply personal. I could literally talk about this idea of breaking the cycle for I don't know how many episodes, like tons of episodes. So if you enjoy this topic, please let me know. And I'm more than happy to dive into all the facets of it. I used to think that if I loved someone enough, I could love them into becoming the person that I knew they were. The potential that I saw, the light within them. And I just needed to give more so that it came out more. And I couldn't have been more wrong. The story I'm going to share is from my younger years. When I was back in graduate school at Ohio State University, I was in a relationship that was not great. It was controlling and abusive, emotionally and physically. And that's not the topic of today's episode, though. The reason I share that is because I was the one that got into that. And I also was the one that got out. Even though I got out of that relationship, the same flavor of relationship kept coming up. So let me share something from that relationship that will help us kind of understand what was my role in it. So in graduate school at Ohio State University, I worked for a non-tenured faculty member. And that just meant that they were a junior faculty member. They hadn't earned tenure, which means that they literally can't get fired. Okay. And so what happens when you're working for someone like that, you are working nonstop, lots of hours to help them reach their publication goals and everything like that. And I was working a lot. And what I would do is I would work Monday through Saturday, late Saturday afternoon, and then I would always try and take one day off. Now, not all of my colleagues would take one day off, but I did because I needed to drive an hour and a half to go see my boyfriend at that time. Every weekend, I drove an hour and a half there. And early Monday morning, so it'd be Saturday night, and then early Monday morning, I would wake up and do the drive back to Ohio State in Columbus, Ohio, and I would go back to work. And I just poured myself into that relationship. Anytime anything came up, I kept thinking I just needed to give more. Any issue there was, I always thought it was something I could do differently. And there was. And I didn't do the right thing. Instead, I just kept pouring in. And when a relationship is one-sided like that, it's difficult to see in the moment. I mean, I could shame myself and say I should have seen it. And trust me, I've shamed myself for not seeing it earlier. But that's why this is important to talk about. Every time I did that in that relationship and poured myself into it, whether that was, anytime there was an issue, I would drop everything on my plate to attend to the issue, whatever it was. I always took it on myself when something was wrong and that I needed to do better. Now, I'm not talking about what they said to me. It was still my choice. I didn't feel like it. Even when someone tells you it's your responsibility to fix, it's still your choice to decide if it really is your responsibility to fix. And I didn't know that it wasn't my responsibility to fix everything. But boy, did I try. I tried so very hard. And when I was able to leave that relationship, what happened was it kind of caught on fire. And I think that you probably have that in your relationships too. When they end, when a relationship ends, it's usually because something got bad enough to where you can kind of pull away and pause and go, wow, this is not what I want. For me, the way this happened was my boss, my advisor at the time, he ended up not getting tenure. And it was a really stressful situation because when your boss doesn't get tenure, that means that now you can't have him as an advisor, which meant that I either needed to move to a new research group within the same university in Columbus, or I had to go find another graduate school. And at the time, I was really wanting to be a chemistry professor, and I knew I needed to work for someone currently in the field, and I wasn't super excited about some of the other research that was happening. And there was another professor at Wisconsin-Madison that I really loved his research. And so I brought this to my boyfriend at the time, and I shared with him the disappointment because I was 3 years into my program. I was pouring myself into that, working really hard. I was pouring myself into this relationship. I wasn't pouring into my cup, if you are catching on. And I knew that I needed to do something for me. And I could have stayed, like I said, but I wouldn't have been working on the research I wanted to. And so everything kind of came to a head. And when I shared this really disappointing news to them, to my boyfriend at the time, I'll never forget how it went down. I shared this with him. I was so upset because it was terrible news to hear. It was terrible news. It's just terrible in general for someone to lose their job that they've worked really hard at. I mean, it just was not a fun day. And I explained that I was really worried about my career and what I wanted to do. And I mentioned that one option could be to go to another graduate school so that I could keep doing research that really meant a lot to me. And he said to me, I'll never forget, he said, "But what about all the work I've done?" And you might have these moments in your own life and your own relationships where someone says something that just rips open the top of the box, like the box that you kept just shoving all the crap about your relationship, and you keep pushing down all the things that you want to avoid about it, and that's what happened when he said that. He said, "But what about all the work I've done?" And he explained to me that he has done so much for me to be able to study and be a graduate student. And I just was so absolutely appalled by the statement because I was the one in the lab. I was the one working really hard. I was the one driving back every weekend to see him. I was the one that was stopping what I was doing so I could attend to whatever fire he decided to set in our relationship. I was the one that was loving and giving and giving and giving and giving. And then to hear that it not only wasn't enough, but they thought they were the ones giving the whole time. I'm not saying this because they were wrong in saying that. They could have that feeling. They're welcome to think that. However, I knew what was true for me, and that's not what was happening in my reality. And it just lifted the top of the box that made me go, this is it. I am done. I am no longer giving. I am no longer putting into this. This is, in Monopoly, it's don't pass go, don't collect $200. Like, no, we're not going past go anymore. I couldn't believe that they said that to me. And it was then that I made the decision that I was going to do something for myself. And that's why I moved to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I started working for the new advisor that I really wanted to work for. And that's how the whole saga of me starting music happened in Wisconsin. You can go back to episode 1 to hear that. And even though I had left that relationship, I thought that I had healed from it, right? And I was healing from it through music, right? By uncovering all the things about that relationship. And I found that that wasn't the case. And so in today's episode, we're talking about repeating cycles and breaking the cycle of relationships. And one of the flavors that I'm talking about is giving too much. And I noticed that then with each of my next relationships, I still had more to learn. I kept dating someone's potential. Have you ever dated someone's potential? Have you ever become friends with someone because of who they were for a little bit of time, and then they kept showing you who they were, but you held on to the part that was good? Do you do that? Do you hold on to the part that's good? Gosh, I'm so good at doing that. And I kept finding that relationship after relationship. I kept seeing the light in someone and thinking if I loved them enough, more of it would come out. And it was my choice to give and give and give. Now, not every relationship was like that. I've definitely had some wonderful ones that just didn't work out. And relationships are hard in general. Friendships are difficult, and romantic relationships are extremely difficult. At least for me, they have been. And I realized that even when I give and give and give, it never gave back in the same way. I learned through that repeating cycle, relationship after relationship, that what was happening was I was trying to fix them. I thought that I could love enough and give enough that they would become the person that I could see within them. And the honest truth is you cannot change someone. They must change because they want to change. And there's no amount of loving someone, there's no amount of giving to someone that's going to change that. I was the one that needed to drop the belief that I could change someone. I needed to stop thinking that I could fix someone. In fact, I wanted to fix someone so badly to prove to myself, this is really hard for me to say, that I was worthy of love. I thought that it was supposed to be hard. That was a belief I had to drop. That wasn't serving me. It kept not serving me. And even when I thought that I had healed from that controlling relationship, it happened again and again. Now, not controlling and abusive anymore. So of course I thought that I had healed because this one wasn't as bad. But I still hadn't healed the part of myself that felt like I needed a relationship. I needed to fix someone in a relationship so that I could receive the love that I wanted. I didn't realize that I was worthy of that without having to do all of that work to fix something first. I didn't realize that I could just have that love without fixing someone. It sounds almost silly to say out loud, but it really was a belief I had that I needed to put more into it so that it would be okay. And what I didn't realize at the time was that I was in these relationships thinking that I was trying to heal the other person when actually I was the one that needed healing. I needed to know that I was worthy of love without having to fix somebody. I didn't have to pour into a relationship to help someone level up so they were on my level. I could literally just say, no, thank you. It has taken me years and years to really understand this. If you are currently in a pattern like this, I don't expect you to be able to see the pattern. But one of the ways that it helped me, I was able to move through this, was that I recognized that it was a pattern. We can fool ourselves into thinking that we're healing. Let me show you one way. My first controlling relationship, when I got out of it, my next one was wonderful. He was wonderful. I still did the same thing, though. I saw his potential and I dated his potential and I poured into him, trying to help him level up. And so I thought I healed because I wasn't in a controlling relationship anymore. Sure, I healed maybe part of myself, but the truth is I was still in that cycle. I still had a belief that I needed to fix something in order for me to feel worthy. So it was just this pattern of relationships where I really wasn't just loving them for who they were. I was trying to fix them. And that's really not fair for the other person, to be honest. That's not fair. And I wasn't trying to be malicious by doing that. But when you date someone's potential, you're not really seeing them. I only saw their potential. I wasn't seeing them for who they were, and I wanted them to change, and I thought that I could help them change by loving them enough. Really, it was a self-worth issue for me within myself. When I saw this pattern, when I finally saw the pattern, I really changed up how I started to date. I really changed how I interacted with every type of relationship, including friendships. And one of the ways that helped me launch out of that cycle was focusing on my friendships, and those got better first, and then my romantic relationship followed after that. So let's break this down using the scientific method. So my question was really like, why do I keep falling for people that end up leaving me heartbroken and empty, right? Like I was empty after each one of these relationships. That was all I knew at the time. I knew that I didn't feel the love that I wanted, and I felt empty. I just did. And my hypothesis was it was them. It was them, right? And when I kept thinking it was them, I kept having the cycle repeat. And I'll talk at the end of the episode why this is so beautiful. We'll use my song Time and Again, and I'll share why these repeated cycles are exactly what you need to grow. I couldn't actually see that it was me because I was the one pouring in and giving so much love. So my first hypothesis was that it was them. And when I kept doing the life experiments of going into new relationships and the same thing would happen, I had to come away with a different hypothesis, right? Every time you do an experiment and it gives you data, you can start to adjust your hypothesis. And my hypothesis was that, well, maybe I'm giving too much. Maybe I see someone's potential instead of actually dating them for who they are. And by dating someone's potential, I'm actually missing out on who they actually are so that I can make a good choice. So this takes us to step number 3, which is to run an experiment. What I started to do was I started to date a lot more consciously. And I started to recognize myself giving and noticing what happened when I would give. Do they give back? And here was the key point of the experiment that helped me collect the most data, which was how did I feel in the relationship? Almost every other relationship before, I kept thinking about how they felt, right? how they felt. And in this case, I started asking, how do I feel? Do I feel like myself? Do I feel okay? Do I feel safe? Do I feel loved? And that helped me a lot. It helped me recognize when I was giving too much, right? And it helped me recognize what I was receiving back. And the data I collected from that really surprised me. I actually got pretty lonely. When I started dating like that, I started saying no to people that I didn't feel good around. And what was interesting about that is even though I was saying no a lot more, I had a fuller cup because I wasn't pouring it out all the time into other people. And so I started to say no. I started to recognize that. So step 4 is to make an observation. I started to observe that I was lonely. I was saying no a lot more. I had a fuller cup for myself, which was good. My relationships in other areas were getting better. My friendships were getting better. I had more energy to give into those relationships that were also giving back, which was really cool. And when I analyzed the data, what I find to be really interesting about a cycle of a pattern that repeats is that I don't think I would have seen it unless it happened as many times as it did. I reasoned away each relationship for a variety of reasons, and I didn't see the common thread in all of them. And so it wasn't until I ran enough experiments that I actually got the data I needed. And so if I analyze all of them, it's just that I kept dating someone's potential. I was dating their potential, not who they actually were. And in a way, it's not fair to them. It's not fair to them either. So when I think about the conclusion of all of these experiments, which is the last step of the scientific method, I've learned that it's so important for you to focus, for me at least, to focus on how I feel in certain situations and notice when I'm giving too much. Because if your cup is not full, you have nothing to give. You really don't. And I had to drop that belief that I had more capacity to give than they did. That really hurt me in the long run. I know that you have capacity to give. I have capacity to give. And if we give too much of ourselves, so much so that we feel empty, you are doing no one a favor. You are doing no one a favor. And I can say that with full confidence. For me, it's been very true. I was doing no one a favor. When my cup is empty, what can I give? It was really hard to be lonely. It was really hard to say no as many times as I have. It was really hard to cut relationships off faster, after a couple dates, right? And then thinking, this isn't right. It was really difficult to do that. But when I focused just on the experiment, which was, I'm going to give and see what comes back and notice how I feel. When I did that, that gave me more data to recognize when something wasn't feeling right. I don't need to know what someone's potential is. I need to like them who they are right in the moment when I meet them. And if it's not right, it's not right. Now, everyone can grow. Some of you, if you're listening to this podcast, you might think, oh my gosh, but people can change and people can grow. Absolutely. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when someone meets you where they're at, with where you're at, if it doesn't feel good and it requires them to change a whole lot, it's not for you. Put it down. Put it down. Just trust me from my experience. Just put it down. It's not for you right now. That doesn't mean forever. It just means right now. Another thing I learned that was so important is when someone shows you who they are, believe them. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. don't think that you can change who they are if you love them more. That is not a path I ever want to go down again. And I sure did many times. So that's my conclusion from those experiments. And let me tell you what, when I've run all of these experiments and gotten to the place that I'm at right now, my current relationship is wonderful. We have what's called an us bucket. We kind of joke about, like, we pour into each other and we pour into our relationship as a partnership. And we've got this bucket that is for us, right? And we have our own buckets that we pour into. And we have one that's our bucket together. And we laugh that when we pour into that bucket, it actually gives exponentially. So if we both pour in a little bit, all of a sudden even more comes out. And I think that's the beautiful thing about a partnership, in that both people are giving. Both people are pouring into not only the relationship, but the other person as well. And they can do that because they have their own cups full. They are working on themselves, and they have that to also share. It's not one-sided. And no matter how much you pour into somebody else, no matter how much you do, and you'll break yourself if you do it. I broke myself many times by just pouring and pouring and pouring. It never feels good. And even if they were to change, you would be empty. And no amount of being your authentic self requires you to completely pour your cup out for someone else. When you're being your authentic self, it feels good. It is infinite in energy. It feels amazing. Sure, you'll get tired sometimes. Maybe meditate, it helps a lot. But it's not draining to the point where you lose yourself. It's not draining to the point where you question, what am I doing? You don't feel lost. When you're acting from your authentic self, you don't feel lost. And so many times in my previous relationships where I've poured and poured and poured myself into, I felt a little lost because I didn't know what else to do, because there was nothing else that I needed to do except let it go. Let it go. If it's meant for you, if it's really meant for me, I've learned this too, if it's meant for me, it's really hard to mess up. It's hard to mess up the right thing that's for you. This comes with trust. This comes with practicing a lot of life experiments. But I know you have something in your life that you thought maybe you messed up, but it was right for you. And it came back. It's really difficult to mess up the right thing in your life when it is for you, for your real authentic self. I want to share a bit from my song, Time and Again. This song is in my I Am album, and it's the 7th track on my album. Time and Again is a song all about repeating patterns. And if you're someone who's experiencing this, please know that you're not the only one. And I know if you're anything like me, you've had some shame come up around it, thinking things like, why didn't I see it earlier? And the point is that you didn't, and it is okay. And it needs to be okay that it keeps returning. There's nothing wrong with a pattern happening, as long as you keep learning. That's all it is. And I promise you, you never have to worry if you learned everything from the lesson, because it will keep showing up time and again. No amount of shame is going to get you out of that cycle. The key is just keep going, keep learning the best you can. And at the end of this podcast, I'm going to share something really, really helpful. Let me share some lyrics, though. This part of my song is the bridge, and I absolutely love it. The vocal line that you're going to hear, I want you to think about it kind of like your intuition telling you something and waiting until you hear it. So you'll hear me sing the vocal line, and then my main vocal will sing it back. And at the end of the bridge, the intuition voice goes away because I have connected with my authentic self and realized this relationship is no longer for me. It's like it was kind of patiently waiting that I would catch on that this is not for me. So these are the lyrics. I believed a foolish dream. My mind was playing tricks on me. No, nothing's changed. Now I see. You can't be the one for me. That last line, you can't be the one for me. That's when I've reconnected with my authentic self, and you'll hear all of the vocals together rather than a call and response. So here's that bridge for you.
Oh no, I believed a foolish dream. I was playing tricks on me. Now nothing's changed. And now I see you can't be the one for me. Oh. Woo. Time and again.
So let's go through your life experiment. I would love for you to first reflect on the relationships in your life. This could be friendships or this could be romantic relationships, and think about a repeating pattern that you've seen. And the easiest way to find a repeating pattern you've seen, now the key is it's one you don't like, is think about relationships that didn't end very well or that you're glad that they're gone, they're done. You don't want them to happen ever again. If it's happened more than once, there's something for you to learn within that. And I want you to reflect on this. That's the first step. And you're going to start to hypothesize, why did this keep happening? And what I really want you to focus on is what within you were you doing the same in those relationships? What were you doing the same? This helps you separate what they were doing, because they're obviously different people, versus what you're doing. So what were you doing that was the same in those relationships? Try and notice any pattern, okay? And we're going to run an experiment. Now, before I tell you the experiment, I want to share with you what it means to heal. Do you know what it really means to heal? When we heal something, it's usually something we don't like. It's painful. It doesn't feel good. Think about like a broken bone. Have you ever broken a bone? Think about that. That is an easy way for us to discuss this. If you've broken a bone, what does it mean to heal? Well, it means to not have a broken bone, right? You have I broke my nose once. I have a broken nose. Healing means my nose is no longer broken. You can take an x-ray. You can see that it is no longer broken. Physical pain, physical healing makes a lot of sense. Emotional healing is the same thing. You experience pain, whatever that is. Healing means to experience the opposite. So in your relationships, the repeating pattern, whatever you were doing that was the same, I want you to do the opposite. Notice in my life experiment, I was giving and giving and giving and giving. And when I ran my experiment, I decided not to give as much. I changed it. I was giving tons and then I stopped giving as much. I would give a little and see what would happen in return. I didn't just keep giving. When you do the same thing, that's why the pattern keeps happening. If you want to heal this part and break the cycle, you have to go opposite. In order to heal, you have to experience the opposite. So what you're going to do is when you figure out what that same similar thing you do in all those relationships, you're going to do the opposite. Again, if you were giving too much, now you're not going to give as much, and you're going to just collect data. See how it feels. See what you like. See where it sits. Find out where you're comfortable with giving or not giving. Notice what's happening. Notice how they respond. One of the best tells that you are not in a great relationship is if you stop over giving to someone. Just watch how they react. Just watch. Just watch how they react. I guarantee you, if it's a person who's not for you, they will react in a way that will make you go, wow, they just showed me who they really are. If it's someone for you, they're not going to react in a way that's going to be very negative, because people are people, and sometimes you just don't have as much to give. And people who really like you for who you are, they're not going to react negatively to you when you stop over giving. They're probably going to be really happy for you. And they might even tell you that they love that you are doing more things for yourself. Because when you stop giving so much, you have more energy for yourself. Okay, that's your life experiment. You're going to collect the data. You're going to analyze the data. That's step 5. And in the last step, you're going to draw a conclusion. Now, the key point here is when you draw the conclusion of your experiment, this is not done. This is just one piece of the puzzle. You might find that you pulled back too much. I've done that too. You might find that you stopped giving as much and it doesn't quite feel good yet. That's okay. We're not trying to do this all in one experiment. The idea is that you are going to experience healing, and healing means you experience the opposite of whatever was painful. And the only way you can do that is if you change your action, all right? That's why this experiment is really important. You're the only one who will know like where your pendulum sits. For me, I found it. I figured out how I can be totally myself and not overgive in a relationship. And what really surprises me in my current relationship is every time I stop giving, in times I used to overgive, gosh, he gives. And when you're in a really healthy partnership, that's what's supposed to happen. It shouldn't just be one-sided. I broke the cycle. I broke my cycle. I did it. I'm not doing the same thing anymore. And it's taken me a lot of experiments to get there. So we're at the end of the episode, and I really appreciate you staying here till the end. I want you to know that you aren't alone if you're in a cycle of not great relationships. I also do want to say that if you are currently in an abusive relationship, either emotionally or physically, that you need to get help immediately. This is not okay, and I don't want any of you who are listening to stay in a relationship like that. Whatever you need to do to get help and to get support, please do so immediately. All right. Another thing I want to say is that if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, a family member, anyone that you think might be in a cycle and might need to break that cycle. It's really tough to see these cycles when we're right in it. So maybe the story I shared could shine some light on something that they are also dealing with. I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Authenticity Lab, where we talked about breaking the cycle of repeating patterns that we no longer want in our life. In particular, we were focused on relationships, and I shared a story about a pretty deeply personal relationship for myself. If you want me to talk about this topic anymore, I have so many very specific things I could go into. I'd love if you could comment on the video or send me a message. I could literally talk about this for the entire year. I won't. I'll go through new episodes, but please let me know if you want me to talk more about breaking cycles, breaking patterns within our lives. I think this is one of the most difficult things to do. It's one of the most difficult things to see, and it's one of the most difficult things to do. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you next week with a new story and a new life experiment to help you live more boldly, lead with curiosity, and keep being your most amazing, authentic self.
Yeah, that house will always call you.